Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. We are talking today about a topic that we've covered a number of times on the podcast from different angles and realised that we haven't covered it much recently. And that is the topic of how you can be strategic when the operational workload that you're under keeps dragging you into the weeds. And we've been reminded of this because it's just such a common topic for clients. I have had this so many times just in the last few months with different client conversations. So it felt remiss that we hadn't covered it for a while. So what we're going to do today is explore this, and then we will also include in the show notes a link to a playlist of our other strategic thinking episodes. So we will delve into it today, and then we will give you some more resources that can really help if you are struggling for the time and capacity to be able to think strategically, or if you're one of those people that keeps getting told you need to be more strategic and you're just like, yeah, that would be amazing. How the hell do I find the time? So Pam, this is just a rinse and repeat topic, isn't it? It comes up for so many people.
Yeah, it does. And I think it comes up, or it shows up in loads of different ways. So I think the more we talk about this and talk about the different ways that it shows up, I think the more helpful it is for people to start thinking about how they can be more strategic and ultimately how they can progress in their career and create high performing teams and do all the good stuff that we want to do as a leader and feel like we're in control of everything as well.
That's such a good point. People don't feel in control of their workload. They don't feel able to create time and capacity to do good thinking. Every single time I have this conversation with somebody, they feel desperate for the opportunity to do some thinking. And normally people know that if they could just have some time and have some headspace, that they can operate at that strategic level. And I think this really impacts so often when people are in that mid-management or a next kind of step to a leadership role where they've got all the pressures from above, from people asking them to deliver projects and get involved with this. And then they are also managing and leading teams. And especially if their team is newly formed or is inexperienced or doesn't quite have the expertise to operate at the pace that they need, they're constantly feeling like they're being dragged into things, constantly feeling that they're being asked to deliver more. And that seems to just come always at the expense of thinking time. And when I look back into my career, I had so many times and phases where it was however many hours you do, it's never enough. The to-do list never gets done.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, like we always say, take a pause, don't we? Put some time in the diary, and the usual fix for it, isn't it, is to block out some time in your calendar and force yourself to do that thinking. But sometimes, I mean, I remember back to when I was in the thick of it, and I would block time out in my calendar. Sometimes I just had my head on the desk because I was like, oh my goodness, like there's so much going on, and probably like was thinking I was still in the last meeting, like thinking about, all of the stuff that was coming up, all of the stuff that I hadn't done. The to-do list was getting out of control. There were still people asking, have you got a minute? Have you got 5 minutes? And it just all felt like, wow, there's so much going on. How am I meant to think? And then you go home and you've got a social life, you've got a family life, you've got all of this stuff going on. So you think, oh, well, when I get home, spend an hour thinking, but then you get home and then you're into all of the stuff that you do outside of work. And I think you can just get so caught up in the day to day, and you just end up, it's like you trap yourself in the weeds, and you're just constantly just doing what you need to do to get through that day, rather than stopping and going, right, like, what do I want to do? What's going to move me forward?
I remember a client, this is, months and months and months ago now, but it hit me so much at the time when they said this. And they said, Jackie, I just do whatever my diary tells me to do next. It was so driven by other people's agenda, by meeting requests that were in there, by a million and one things that needed to be done. And I think that is such a common experience where people just get themselves into that cycle. And I think probably the driver for this episode was, we're not covering here what strategic thinking is or how to kind of convince other people that you have that ability. But I think the angle that we probably hadn't talked about as much in the episodes that we've done before is that very often this is not as much of a practical problem as people think it might be. This often is about habits and about people's sense of self and sense of identity. They're the real challenges that people have to overcome. Like you say, having that time in the diary, when people do it, they don't stick to it. And there's often deeper seated reasons for that. So we've come up with a few things that we wanted to talk through so that people can consider, can't they, which of these other drivers might be at play here? Because I think when you acknowledge that maybe this isn't just a practical problem, that's tough, because it means it's on you, because it means it's about your mindset, your sense of self, your identity. But it's also helpful because if it's about you, then it's also within your control to at least have some resolution. So we're taking nothing away from the fact that demands can be huge and the practical barriers can be there. But today is the opportunity to really help think about what are some of the deeper seated reasons that contribute and stop people from really being able to get to that headspace and be able to think strategically. So what's the first one of our little list then that people might be inadvertently contributing to?
So I think the first one is going to be the escalation loop. So this is where the decisions and the problems keep flowing back to you, because you're the person that's always got the answer, and your team basically learn to keep bringing you the problem instead of finding their own answer. And it keeps going around in the same loop. And I totally feel this one as a recovering people pleaser, because it feels good to be that person that has all the answers that people rely on, that you get known for, if you need an answer to something, Pam can give you the answer. And it feels good until it doesn't feel good, until you're completely overwhelmed by it all. So I think that's probably the first one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think often with this one, what I hear is people are frustrated. They feel like the escalation is coming from other people. It's like, if my team would just give me a bit of breathing space, if they wouldn't ask me, if they would just do it without checking everything, without that, have you got 5 minutes? And so there's a frustration often that I sense where people want other people to behave differently. And I think with the escalation loop, it's about acknowledging, what am I doing that is creating this situation where people are constantly escalating things to me? And some of that, like you say, is about I just give the answers. So I make it easier. And I've had like senior people where we've had to work in coaching over some period of time because that's the behavior loop that had been created, where it was quicker, it was easier, I can give you the answer, you've asked me a question. And it can feel, not only does it feel good to have the answer, but I think sometimes it can feel mean. And if you're quite a people focused manager and leader, it can feel quite mean to be kind of pushing somebody away and saying, I don't need to give you the answer to that. you can go find it, or you should know the answer to that. So what do you think the answer is? And you don't have to phrase it that way when you reply to people, but I do think it's really key to notice where you've got yourself entangled, and you will instinctively give people an answer rather than ask them, what do you think? How would you approach that situation? Or at different times, it's about saying, it's not the escalation that's the issue, it's the immediacy that every single escalation happens in the moment as a stream of consciousness. So I think sometimes it's about pushing back and making sure that you don't just jump in and give people the answers, because that reinforces that they'll escalate things. And sometimes it's about having some boundaries about when are you available to have things escalated to you? When is it that you can support people? And just telling people that some of the times you're not available. So the world is not going to stop turning because you have been unavailable for an hour or two. Your team can wait. They're just not used to waiting.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that I implemented was like a decision tree process where we looked at what are all of the common things that people are coming to me with, and can I help them and support them in supporting themselves, like making decisions themselves and empowering them to do that. And it was such a big thing to do because everybody was so used to just getting the answer from me. So I think that is really useful. I mean, I even do that with my son now. I've got like some decision trees, where it's like, he before he comes and, says we've got a problem, it's like, okay, can I solve this myself? Can I think through this myself? Can I come with some options? And I think it's good to start thinking like that, and taking away that need to be the fixer, to be, the one that's got all of the answers. And I think that links into the second one of almost the addiction to being needed, because it does give you that little bit of a high when you're the people pleaser, the one with all the answers. It feels good to be able to, all these people are coming to you and you're giving them the answers, and they're taking the answers away, and they're not using their own brain to think because they're just using your brain. And, you can almost get addicted to that feeling because it does feel good.
I reflect back, it's really interesting hearing you talk about your son, because when I was growing up, my dad was an engineer, and there was definitely, when I reflect, I'm like, oh, yeah, we had decision trees. I wasn't aware that that's what they were at that point. But he very much was expected us to be independent, to think for ourselves, to think logically. That was how his brain worked. And so he trained us to think about, how do you find a solution? And then when you were then moving on to talk about the addiction to being needed, I definitely did that. And I think what this often can feed is you're signaling busyness to the rest of the organization. If you are busy, if you are a person with the answers, if you are a troubleshooter and a fixer, often what I've experienced with clients is that that feels to them, and sometimes it's rewarded within the organization, that if you're busy and you're a hard worker, you're visibly seen as an important cog. And a lot of organizations will inadvertently reinforce that, because it will feel that the more you know and the more knowledge you keep, the more that signals your value to the organization. And so I think there's a real mindset piece of, your role is not to be the decision maker. Your role is to make sure that good decisions get made without your involvement. And that is really quite the mindset shift. And I don't think, when I reflect back on my career, I'd really got that. I love developing people, and I definitely rewarded and encouraged people that were independent thinkers. But I don't think I'd quite got to that point of recognizing my role should be to make sure that I'm involved in as few decisions as possible, only the ones that absolutely really need me. And that requires setting aside your ego and saying, I don't want to be this important because I'm busy or important because I know stuff. I want to be adding value by facilitating what other people can contribute.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because that links in quite nicely with number three, which is the expertise trap, because you tend to get pulled in to the stuff that you're good at, the stuff that you know, and especially if you've been promoted internally and you at some point you've been like the technical expert and now you're trying to be the strategic leader, but you get pulled back into things because you've got that technical expertise and knowledge. And if the team have got a gap, it feels good, doesn't it, to kind of help them fill that gap. And you can get sucked in to, again, the day to day when really your focus should be elsewhere.
Yeah, I had a conversation just yesterday on this topic. Large organization, exactly that. Someone that is wanting to progress and move on, but the feedback that they're getting is you're not going to get that opportunity by demonstrating more of your knowledge. You've reached a ceiling point. And so I think when you are the person that holds so much of that information in your head, you can be a point of failure. You can be involved in things that are not needing your involvement because of your level, but needing your involvement because of what you know. And so I think it's so important to recognize when that is happening and think about how can this be reversed? How can other people gain the knowledge so that things do not rely on me? And again, that from a mindset perspective, you're almost taking yourself out of things, feels really counterintuitive of I want to be involved in as few things as possible because you haven't yet got that strategic thinking space to replace it. So it's kind of almost like I'm trying to do less. And again, I remember a conversation with somebody who was talking about what I used to think earlier in my career, what do those senior people do all day? And I'm worried that if I'm not the busiest person on my team, then what will my team think of me? They might think that I'm just living life and having a great time, pushing all the work to them. So I think definitely when you hold a lot of knowledge in your head, there is that sense of it's difficult to try and create the situation where that no longer happens, but it's really important to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that leads into to the fourth thing, which is the diary space isn't headspace. And I think that's where we get so caught up because we go, right, what we need to do to be more strategic is we need to plan the time into the diary. So we plan the time in and we block it out, and then we get to that time, and then we're like, right, but there's still a million things going around in my head. There's unresolved emails, that there's things going on, and you kind of like, right, okay, like stop the train, let me get off. I need to do this thing in time because I planned it in. But it's not always that easy, is it, to do that?
No, and we've got some advice in one of our episodes on how to make the most of that when you are creating some diary time. But that's the thing, is even sticking to that diary time, people often are not ruthless with that because there is so much on the list. There is so many things being thrown at them that they just think, oh, I can't do it today. I'll come back to it. And so it's not so much creating the diary space, it's sticking to it. And that's hard for both of those reasons. So if you recognize that you've done that, where you've tried to create some thinking space and then you've not stuck to it, definitely go to the playlist and listen to the other episodes, because there's some really sequential advice on how to try and make that change and start to make it stick. But it definitely starts with that headspace of the thinking is not separate from the work. The thinking is not one of the things on the to-do list. The thinking has to be prioritized. It has to be at the top. And for most people, it doesn't come top in their headspace for exactly the reasons you talk about. That how do you switch yourself off when the meeting that you've just had, the email that you've just seen ping, the Teams message from somebody saying, have you got 5 minutes? And you know that you've got to remember to have that conversation at some point today if you don't have it straight away. So yeah, real mix there, I think, of both the kind of the practical and the mindset aspects.
Yeah, and then I think the final thing, which is the relentless optimism trap.
I named this one because this was so me. I am a relentless optimist about how much I can get done.
I think I have to also put myself in that category too. But I think the main thing around this, and I suppose this underpins all of this, is that believing once things calm down, that you'll finally get the time to think strategically, and the weeks go by, the months go by, the years go by, and you're like, one day when I get on top of everything, when everything's sorted out, when I get that hour that I can actually just think straight, that's when I can think strategically. And it never ever comes, does it?
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think we've named it quite tongue in cheek, because there is that sense of, has it ever worked for you before that you've ticked off everything on your to-do list and then given yourself the reward of some thinking time? If it's never worked for you before, let's just have some brutal honesty here. It's not going to start working for you. The problem is not that you lack a work ethic. The problem is not that you don't know how to work through your to-do list. The problem is that the space to think has to come top of the list, has to be prioritized, because that relentless optimism, as endearing as it is, let's say it's endearing because we both identify with it, but it doesn't work, and it's not suddenly going to change.
Yeah, so it's so true, isn't it? It's like, yeah, brutal honesty, it's not going to change. So what can you do? So what is the best advice for somebody that's listened to this, go, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, I don't know how to make this stop and, get into that mode where I can allow myself some thinking time and some strategic thinking time as well. So what are the things that people can do to help?
So I think the first thing is really consider that question of, how are you contributing to this? Because you can only change what you do and how you behave. There are times where the organization is asking too much, and sometimes the answer is to let things fall down the cracks, to say, I can't do it all. Because often what keeps people in the weeds is that practical sense that capacity does not equal the demands on that capacity. There's a demand for twice what there is capacity to actually deliver. So some of it is very much around the boundaries and around, you sometimes have to not meet a deadline. You sometimes have to push back. But I think you have to acknowledge, what part do I play? Am I the person that is allowing people to escalate things? Am I getting that buzz off of being the person that has the knowledge and is good at my job? And so I'm keeping doing that, and I'm creating the space in the diary, but then not sticking to it. So once you know where that is, there's probably 3 things I think that we'll talk through. So one is to really start to pay attention to noticing when you are that escalation point and you don't want to be. And it links into the expertise piece as well, because if somebody needs to have training or be developed or to understand your thinking so that they can solve that problem for themselves in the future, that is more time consuming than just doing it yourself. So I think it's about noticing and catching yourself before you jump in. It's that question that we've recommended so many times before on the podcast of, when somebody asks you for an answer, ask them, before I give you my answer, what thinking have you done here already? What decision are you recommending? Really train people to come to you already having given some thought to something and being able to articulate either, I was thinking this, but I've got stuck because I don't know this thing, or I think we should do this. Is that okay? Because that, getting other people to do the thinking that they should be doing, is so critical in that piece of removing yourself from decisions and having that mindset that the more decisions that happen without your involvement, the more problems that get solved without your involvement, the better.
Yeah, and I love that question, like, what thinking have you done already? Because a lot of the time people haven't thought, we've got a problem. Can you help? This is the problem. And it's like, wow. And yeah, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to have the answer. But if they haven't done any thinking, they're just not developing. And I suppose that's your job, isn't it, as the leader, to say, well, what thinking have you done? To either push it back on them and make them realize that you haven't done any thinking around it and they should have done, or to even make it an expectation that if you bring a problem to me, regardless of how big this problem is, I need to understand your thinking, what you've already thought, what you think the options could be, before we get into the conversation. And, that's for their development, but also for the business as well. It's not just about you pushing it back all the time, it's about helping them and also supporting the business growth as well. So, what else can people do?
So the second thing is I describe this as find a pattern rather than an individual instance of something. Very often, when I talk to clients about where are they stuck in the weeds, what are they involved in, the way to create capacity is to notice where is there a pattern? Where is there a type of problem or a repeated thing that comes to them time and time again, or a repeated task that they get drawn into? Where is there a pattern of things that are happening that are sucking you into the weeds? And the reason for looking for the pattern is because it's a signal that that is a problem that's worth solving. You can put time and effort into solving something that, if it happens once or twice a year, is not really going to make much impact on your ability to get out of the weeds. But if it's something that is happening on the daily, then that is going to have a more significant impact. So it's really about choosing to consider where are the things that happen time and time again, and be specific with this. So it's not the team coming to me with, can I have 5 minutes? Because that doesn't tell you enough about the problem. So which members of the team come to you more often? What types of questions come up time and time again? What times of day is it most disruptive? What meetings are you sucked into that you don't need to be in? And how often do they happen? Because if you extract yourself from a meeting that happens weekly and instead get the notes circulated to you, then that will free up repeated time. If you do that with a quarterly meeting, it's not going to make much difference.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, as you're talking through there, I'm just thinking, wow, like even just taking one or two of those things could actually free up some time and some time to think as well. And then I suppose the final thing is probably about asking yourself how you can be less involved, isn't it? Because that's the real difficult one, I think.
Yeah. So I talk about three Ds when there are things that you could be less involved with. So this is a case of kind of looking at your diary, your calendar over probably a month to 2 months, something like that, and really think about where are the things that I would want or need to or should be less involved in than I currently am. And your 3 Ds are either ditch it, delegate it, or design it. So ditch it being, I shouldn't be involved, I can step back. Meetings are a good example of that. Often you're involved in meetings, and if you think about what contribution have I actually made, you could circulate a paper, you could go to those once in a while, you could go for the 10-minute agenda point that typically you're needed for. Often people are spending a lot of time in meetings that they don't need to. So ditch it where you can. Delegate it means think about who could be doing this or could be involved in this. And sometimes that's about members of your team, but sometimes that's about where things sit within the organization. And then the final one is about design it differently. So this is about thinking, how could I, and there's so many options with this, you know, how could I automate it? How could I change a process? How could I reduce the scope of something? You know, the number of times I've had conversations with people about kind of, you know, reports or board packs or what have you. Okay, how much time does that take you to produce, and how much value are people getting from it? Do they still need that thing that was agreed as a scope 3 years ago? If you design that report differently, could you automate the stats that go into it? Could you provide the narrative more quickly, more easily? So yeah, thinking about how to extract yourself from being involved, use that 3Ds, ditch it, delegate it, or design it differently.
I love that. I think that's just like a really good thing to remember as well, isn't it? So when you're kind of stuck in the weeds, you can ask yourself those 3 things.
So hopefully that has given some challenge around what's really happening here and what's your part in it, but also a bit more of that kind of practical, okay, and if you're recognizing that, what are some of the ways that you can actually do something about it to create some of that strategic capacity?
So if you found this episode useful, please do share it with anybody else that you think it could help. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. And the link to the playlist of all the other episodes we've talked about within this episode will be in the show notes. And if there's anything you'd like us to cover on the podcast, please do get in touch, and we'll be back next time with another episode.